You're listening to The Jake Asman Show on the SportsMap Radio Network.
Presented by Rocket Mortgage.
Live from the O'Reilly Auto Parts Studios, here's Jake Asman.
Our next guest has been all over the latest developments with Deshaun Watson and his ongoing legal situation. He is the host of the Contramental podcast. You can check that out wherever you get your podcast and follow them on Twitter at Contramental. Going out to the Progressive guest line right now, we bring on sports attorney Dan Lust to break it all down for us. Dan, appreciate your time tonight. Thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure, Jake. Let's just say it's been a whirlwind with this media circus.
Absolutely. So what did you make of the developments of what happened yesterday? What is the significance of Deshaun Watson's accusers now having to reveal their identities?
So I'm going to imagine if those that are listening to the show are pretty well-versed in all things Deshaun Watson at this point. It's now week 3 of the media cycle. So we're almost at this point, Jake, at a masterclass in civil versus criminal litigation, different strategies on the plaintiff and defense side. What we had yesterday was very interesting. It was basically a counterpunch from Rusty Hardin. Tony Busby, if anyone's been following this case closely, has been litigating this case in the press. He's been making allegations about non-consensual acts. And at some point, you had to make a decision. Are you going to sit on your hands and just kind of let the plaintiff, make this media circus, or are you going to respond? And obviously, Rusty Hardin took the latter approach. So, I guess there's a couple things to break down. Obviously, the Busby press conference, but yesterday was Hardin's attempt at a counterpunch and essentially saying that all of these acts were consensual in some way, shape, or form. So, an interesting development, but that's, it's nothing so surprising. It's a he said, she said. Watson's going to say it's consensual, and on the other hand, Busby's going to say it's not. So it's obviously setting up for some fireworks, but interesting that Hardin decided to take kind of Busby approach and kind of lay his cards on the table.
What did you make of the revelation from Rusty Hardin that Deshaun Watson has admitted that some of these encounters with these masseuses have led to what they're calling consensual sex?
We'll say it's an odd strategy. As they say on Twitter, Jake, that's a bold strategy, cotton type move. It begs the question, right? And people have brought this up online. I think it's a very astute point. There have been at least allegations here that there was an exchange of money that occurred for some of these services, right? Sometimes Deshaun Watson paid, sometimes he did not pay. He stiffed people in the bill. These are the allegations. But if you're going to take the leap and say that, these were at no point was anything non-consensual, that there was consensual acts that occurred, I think the normal, we'll say to bridge the gap in this, that this is some type of pay for play type scenario. You can use the college basketball references in there, but that's another act that would be illicit and then maybe not allowed under state law, depending on exactly what occurred. So it's an interesting strategy. I would think in this scenario, at least one option would be just don't say anything, right? Don't admit to anything being consensual, or just don't say anything. Just sit on your hands. So I think the strategy is interesting. I'm not, I can't get inside Watson's team's camp, but I will say, Jake, at this stage, Watson's got to come forward with his best defense if he's going to litigate the case in the press. And if that's his best shot, I think that's saying something about the strength of his defense.
If there's a desire to settle, Dan, how quickly can that happen with 22 women? Are we past the point of Deshaun even being able to settle this out of court? What do you make of kind of where we're at in regards to a potential settlement?
So I see the rumors that Watson's still trying to settle the case. I know basically last week there was some allegation that Watson had been reaching out to accusers directly to try to settle the case, which I'm sure Rusty Hardin has told him to stop doing if that indeed was occurring. But I don't, at the end of the day, Watson's got to protect his civil interest, his criminal interest, but he's got to protect his NFL interest. And in the court of public opinion, settling these cases after you put your foot down and said that you didn't do anything wrong, and now you're saying, taking kind of a second step and saying, hey, these were consensual acts. I think settling these cases says a lot in the court of public opinion. I think a suspension is almost certainly going to come. But maybe if you're Rusty Hardin's camp, you're Deshaun Watson's camp, you'd say, hey, let's bite the bullet. Let's try to settle these cases and make this noise go away. If you settle a case before criminal charges are filed, there's always the chance, and if you're the attorney on Watson's side, if you settle the civil case, that these women won't cooperate with the police as witnesses. So, there is a reason to try to settle the case still, but I still think the optics are very poor. You settle 20 of these, right, at maybe it's not that much money to Watson. $100,000 a case is, I think that first offer is allegedly $100,000 to settle. So Watson could afford $2 million, but it's the message that it sends. that it sends to brands, to Nike, to Beats by Dre. Whether he did it or not, it's going to look like he's accepting some guilt with this.
Dan Lust joining us here, sports attorney. You can follow him on Twitter at SportsLawLust. Isn't consent, I guess, really the only defense that Deshaun Watson has here, assuming he ended up meeting these women? I mean, if you were Rusty Hardin, would that be your defense approach? What have you made of just what Deshaun's side of things, kind of how they've been trying to, I guess, spin it publicly so far?
Well, I mean, how do we put it this way? Like, there is a world on the defense side of cases, and we say this. I've worked with prominent, attorneys that work in the Manhattan DA's office. They say on the defense side, you can literally sit on your hands and say nothing the whole trial and still win, because the burden is on the prosecution if it's a criminal case. The burden's on the plaintiff if it's a civil case. The defense doesn't have to do anything because the plaintiff or the prosecution, if it's a criminal case, they bear the burden. So by admitting that some of these things are consensual, you've essentially aided the case. You've given facts to the case. You literally do not have to say a word on the defense side. So, the reason I say that this would be the time to give your best shot if you're Watson, these are his best shots, right? Hey, it was consensual. Hey, I know 22 people are accusing me in civil court, but here's 18 people that said, they had no issues with me. On both of those fronts, they're not a clean defense. It's not like, you wipe the slate clean. It just makes the waters a little murkier. And you'd maybe wait, maybe you're hoping for some electronic discovery via text message or Instagram DMs to get you out of this. But if this is his best shot, I don't really know what other defense he'd have in this. And the problem, Jake, it's 20 accusers, 20 plus accusers. I think right now it's 23 total with the criminal complaint filed in Houston. But yeah, I mean, it's he said, she said. So best case scenario, you get to a jury if he said, she said, and it's a 50-50 type deal. So, I would make sense to settle the case, but I don't think Watson can do that and still save all of his images and his marketing. So he's got to have to make a very tough decision.
Dan, what did you make of Rusty Hardin coming out yesterday and saying, "Oh, well, Deshaun uses Instagram to do business," and then a reporter followed up and said, "Well, why would he be using Instagram to bring on and seek out all these different massage therapists when COVID was going on? Wouldn't that mean he'd more likely want to find one person he trusts that can handle all his needs from a massage therapist standpoint?" What did you make of that line of defense, I guess, from Rusty Hardin?
It's a great question. And in addition to just, safety in terms of COVID protocol, how about privacy? How about you're a high level athlete in the world, right? And you're worried about your stuff getting out there and people knowing your business. And you're now contacting, 20, 30 different people. I think that was interesting. And Jake, the other one that I thought was interesting, just from maybe a Rusty Hardin misstep, there was a question that was asked about social media. And Rusty Hardin was very candid, probably a little too candid. He said, "I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on Instagram. I'm not even on Facebook. When it comes to modern communication, I am an idiot." Hard stop. I don't think there was ever a time in a high-profile case, where you as the lead attorney should be calling yourself an idiot. Because, I mean, listen, you hire the big guns. I'm sure Deshaun Watson, in hindsight, right, a case that deals a lot of e-discovery, a lot of complex communications, I'm sure you don't want your attorney, the lead attorney in the case, saying he's an idiot when it comes to the main portion of evidence of the case. So I know Rusty Hardin has a lot of credentials, but this is kind of a new age media type case. So yeah, I know, because I put a poll up, Jake, and I'm sure you saw it. I just asked the question on Twitter: did yesterday's press conference help or hurt the case? And as I love to do with these Twitter polls, I think it's 83% as of now said it hurt the case. So sometimes less is more. And I think yesterday's press conference gave a lot of fuel to the victims' camp.
Dan Lust with us here. He's a sports lawyer, and definitely you should follow him on Twitter at SportsLawLust. He's been all over the Deshaun Watson allegations and the 22 civil suits that have been filed against the current Texans quarterback. As far as Tony Busby's approach through all this, Dan, as a fellow lawyer, of course, yourself, what have you made of his approach and how he's kind of tried things through the media thus far? It's been effective, I would argue, but what have you made of kind of how he's gone about, leading the plaintiffs here against Deshaun Watson?
If Tony Busby is good at one thing, maybe two things, we'll say, it's bringing clients to his firm. As we've seen, he went from one client to about 22 clients. And the other thing he appears to be pretty good at, this is my first experience with Tony Busby, so it's really only this case I'm looking at. He seems to be very good at bringing attention to the case. And when you're a civil plaintiff, bringing attention to a case seems to be an effective way, and Jake, we're talking about it, to leverage someone into a settlement. And the way to best do that is to keep the pressure on, keep having press conferences, keep putting your posts on Instagram, which I can tell you is not typical for anyone that's curious on that front. But, Tony Busby, in addition to the stuff that he's doing well, and I'll give him credit, I will say this, and I do feel strongly about this. I think Tony Busby embodies the parts of the legal profession, the stereotypes that, I think lawyers don't necessarily agree with, but there are attorneys out there that do it. And these are what I've referred to on my podcast, and I haven't trademarked it yet, so nobody go ahead and steal it. But these are what I call Busbyisms. He'll say something, for example, right? This case is not about money, but any lawyers know if you file a civil case, you're seeking money. There is no other remedy from the court. So if it's not really about money, Tony, why didn't you go to the police department earlier, right? Why didn't you just go directly to the DA's office? So those are some type of odd questions. And then you have the one that came up recently, which I found very fascinating. And I know there's, I'm sure Texans fans that are listening to this. Tony Busby has kind of floated out there that he is exploring adding the Houston Texans to these civil lawsuits to the extent that the Texans knew of Watson's propensity ahead of time and didn't warn anybody. So I don't know if anybody's paying attention to these little, nuggets of these press conferences, but the Houston Texans are $1 billion pocket with billion with a B. So if the case is not about money and the case is about making an example of Deshaun Watson, I'm not sure why you would bring the Houston Texans into the case. So these are Busbyisms, right? Hey, the case is active with the Houston Police Department. Just kidding. It's not. And the Houston Police Department has to call them out. So, I'm still of the opinion, obviously, I don't think his press conference went so great for Rusty Hardin's camp. But Busby, as he's been prone to do, puts his foot in his mouth a lot. So if I'm Rusty Hardin and I'm someone that's, kind of coaching Deshaun Watson, less is more, right? Let Tony Busby have the press conferences. Let him, put his foot in his mouth. And I would just sit back and play defense. And that's what it's meant to do. I think if Rusty Hardin is reading the room, I think that's probably the best way to approach it. I don't think anything good can come from a press conference where you're competing. Hey, it was consensual versus consensual. Those are the type of uncomfortable conversations, which in my view are more likely to lead to a suspension the longer this continues.
Dan Luss with us here. Finally, Dan, got about 45 seconds left. As far as the NFL, do you see the situation unfolding where Deshaun Watson's eventually going to be placed on the commissioner's exempt list? What's a timeline for that, is the way things are trending here?
Yeah, just quick. I mean, I think the NFL has enough as of today to put him on the commissioner's exempt list. Why they would not? Maybe they're making to, get a little bit of an easier decision. If there are criminal charges filed, it's a very easy call for the NFL. They don't have to make anything controversial, but, I think they're just waiting. Timeline wise, I think DA's office can come in with criminal charges if they do in the next couple of weeks. But if they don't, there's no time frame as to when the DA's office has to announce, hey, we are not filing charges. So a little bit of a sticky situation, but I think the earliest answer we get is the next couple of weeks from the DA's office.
Dan Luss, our guest. Follow him on Twitter at SportsLawLust. Great insight about everything happening here with Deshaun Watson. Dan, I got to run, but thanks so much for a couple minutes. Thanks for coming on the show, and you do a great job. We definitely got to get you on again soon.
Thanks, Jake.
Dan Luss with us there, sports lawyer, and you can check out his podcast. And he does his podcast with another good friend of the show, with Daniel Wallach, who's a legal analyst. And the podcast is called Conduct Detrimental. You can find it on Twitter at Con Detrimental. We'll take a quick break, wrap up our show. Jake Asman with you for a few more minutes here on a Saturday on Sports Map Radio.
Are you thinking that it's time to start looking